Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special webinar brought to you by getAbstract, Leading with the Heart with Dan Pontefract and Michael Bungay Stanier. My name is Kirsten Miller-Dalberman, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. The webinar will begin in just a few minutes, and before I introduce our two special guests today, I'd like to just go over a few housekeeping items. First of all, we'd love to hear where you're joining us from. So if you want to in the chat, let us know your name, your city, your company. We just love to see where people are signing in from all over the world. And we do have thousands of people joining us here today, which is very exciting. So just send us a message in the chat and let us know where you're signing in from. Obviously, you are muted. You're in listen only mode, so that's a good thing. And also, you can use the chat to put in your questions at any time. In just a few minutes, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Michael and to Dan, and they're going to go through a presentation. And then after that, we're going to get to your questions. So if something comes up for you at any point, feel free to type that into the chat. We will be watching those and moderating them and posting them to Dan and Michael at the end of their presentation. Also, we want to let you know that the webinar is being recorded. So after the webinar, if you registered, even if you're not here with us live, you will receive a recording for internal usage. And of course, if you have any further questions, you can always reach out to us at any time at corporate@getabstract.com. So now that our housekeeping items are out of the way, I'd like to introduce our guests and hand it over to them. So we have Dan Pontefract and Michael Bungay Stanier. So I'm going to start by introducing Dan because Dan has just released a brand new book called Lead, Care, Win, and it just was released on getAbstract. The summary is there on the getAbstract library, so you can read it there. And Dan is also the winner of getAbstract's Book Award from last year. So that was for his work, Open to Think. He is a leadership strategist, a keynote speaker, and of course, a best-selling author, and founded the Pontefract Group in 2014. His fourth book is Lead, Care, Win, as I just mentioned, and they are going to be speaking a lot about that concept today. A little bit more about Dan. He's a renowned speaker and has presented at 4 different TED events and also writes for Forbes and Harvard Business Review. Dan is an adjunct professor at the University of Victoria, Gustafson School of Business, and has garnered more than 20 industry awards over his career. Previously, as Chief Envisioner and Chief Learning Officer at TELUS, which is a Canadian telecommunications company, he launched the Transformation Office, the TELUS MBA, and the TELUS Leadership Philosophy, all award-winning initiatives that dramatically helped increase the company's employee engagement to record levels of nearly 90%. Prior to TELUS, he held senior roles at SAP, Business Objects, and BCIT. So that's a little bit about Dan. Hey, Dan.
Hi, Kirsten.
And our other guest is Michael Bungay Stanier. So he is at the forefront of making coaching an everyday leadership behavior. He's the author of The Coaching Habit, the best-selling coaching book of the century with over 700,000 copies sold and 1,000 plus 5-star reviews on Amazon. His new book, The Advice Trap, focuses on what it takes to stay curious a little bit longer and tame your advice monster. And just wanted to put a little plug as well, both The Coaching Habit and The Advice Trap are also in the getAbstract library, and there's some of our most highly read, highly popular abstracts. So definitely go check those out as well. In 2019, he was named the #1 thought leader in coaching and was shortlisted for the Coaching Prize by Thinkers 50, the Oscars of Management, and was a Rhodes Scholar. Michael is also the founder of Box of Crayons, which is a learning and development company that helps organizations transform from advice-driven to curiosity-led. He left Australia nearly 30 years ago to be a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, where he says his only significant achievement was falling in love with a Canadian, which is why he now lives in Toronto, having spent time in London and Boston. Balancing out these moments of success, he was banned from his high school graduation for the balloon incident, was sued by one of his law school lecturers for defamation, and his first published piece of writing was a Harlequin romance short story called The Mail Delivery. I swear that's in his bio, everyone.
Which actually, the mail delivery has not yet qualified as a getAbstract abstract, but I'm still hoping.
What is happening?
So Obviously, Michael and Dan, two extremely qualified authors and speakers who we are honored to have with us. I'm going to turn the microphone and the screen over to you to talk about leading from the heart, and I'll see you all in about 40 minutes for audience questions. Thank you, and I can't wait to listen to your presentation.
Brilliant, Kirsten. Thank you very much. Look, so good to have so many of you here. Thousands and thousands of people have signed up from around the world, which is thrilling. It's thrilling also for me to hang out with Dan because Dan and I are actually just good friends. So just any time shooting the breeze with each other is a gift for me. But look, for all of you who are signing in, as much as I love the fact that you're here for a webinar, we also know that webinars are notoriously easy to get distracted on because you're there on the screen in front of you, you got your phone here. So look, I need you to check in the chat box with me now. I know you've already put in where you're dialing in from, and that's great. But I've got a question to start us off. And the question is this: how focused do you plan to be with us during this webinar? How focused do you plan to be? I want you to give me a score between 1 and 7. 1 is low, 7 is high. And just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about, 1 is like, you know what? There's a fire over here. There's a brass band over here. The kids have set something alight in the corner over there. I'm texting somebody right now. I'm texting somebody with another phone in the other hand. Chaos is reigning. And quite frankly, this webinar is just going to be background noise while I get other stuff done. That's a 1. A 7, on the other hand, is like, oh, this Dan and Michael, what a combination. It's like, I don't know what it's like, but it's like, I want to bring my full attention. I want to make the most of this hour. So I've got my noise canceling headphones on. I've shut the door. I've put the phone away. I've done whatever it takes. And even as you are typing in your numbers into the chat box, and I know that blowing up as we speak, here's the one thing I want you to do as the action to take around this. I want you to make one adjustment to your environment that will make it easier to hit the number you've given yourself. That typically means you're going to close down a browser window, put the phone out of reach, clear the desk, shut the door, whatever it is for you. But give yourself the best chance to get something out of this webinar, because this is Dan's new book. And honestly, he's written 4 other books, but this is his best, I think. Most practical, most kind of human. All his stuff is always based on good research, but this kind of speaks to the human in a way he hasn't done before. And we've got 9 lessons. We're going to talk about 5 of them in the book. And I want you to hear what these 5 lessons are, because we'll be sharing good tactics connected to each of the lessons. But Dan, before we get into the first 5 lessons, look, lead, care, win. Most leadership books talk about leading, obviously, because it's a leadership book. Most leadership books talk about winning, because you're like, look, I need to cross the finish line. I need the trophy. That's one of the reasons we're in business, is to try and win. But caring is a bit of a twist, and I'm curious to know why and how caring became literally the center, the heartbeat is the heartbeat of this book, the centerpiece of this book. What made that emerge in the work and the research that you've been doing?
That's a question, Michael. First of all, your intros are always the best. You're just enigmatic, vivacious, and it's great to see it, mate. By the way, we got a bunch of 8s in your 1 to 7, so they're not paying attention, or they're very excited to be focused.
People like that, I'm like, I approve your enthusiasm, but I'm not hiring you as an accountant, because, you know, the 1 to 7 thing, but that's fine.
Just it, yeah, exactly. Well, the fact of the matter is, if we were looking at the title and you had the word care there, we couldn't fit the extra letter in front of care, the S, which is really what it should have been called, right? Lead, scare, win, because that's basically how leadership works these days, isn't it? You scare people, you put fear into the hearts and minds of your team members, and then you win, right?
Nice. So that might be old school wisdom.
Oh, yeah,
is caring really that important? Is that heartbeat thing, or can you just kind of grind people through? I mean, you know, there's plenty of examples right now. Let's just pick politicians across the world who are using scare rather than care as their approach to leadership. I mean, is there evidence to say the caring approach to leadership actually makes a difference?
The evidence, I think, is back to, you know, how do you want to be known when you leave a room? How do you want your customers, your clients, your citizens of the country to feel about you? And maybe your administration, would you like to win another election? How do you handle crises? So, I mean, talking to my good mate who's an Aussie about Kiwis is probably not a good idea, but we can just, turn our attention to Ms. Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand. I
Yeah.
mean, who's kidding who here? You've got an individual whom, when the pandemic was raging high in New Zealand, held a press conference for children to ensure that they knew that she had had a special conversation with the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy, so that both the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy could step out of lockdown and being in quarantine to come into the homes, collect the teeth, give some coins, and also deliver some Easter eggs. Like, that's empathy, that's caring, that's thinking
Yeah.
about others, is it not?
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
When we jump into these principles, we
Right.
can't cover all 9. For that, you're going to have to either get the book or go check out the getAbstract document. But where do we start with this, Dan? Which of the 9 lessons did we start with?
Well, you and I had a good chat about what we might cover off of the 9, and we thought we'd start here with being relatable, right? And so what we thought we would do for the audience here is kind of, talk a bit about what we think's going wrong from the questions to ask yourself or what's going right. So, for you, I've known you now for about a decade, and coming across to others as an uncaring person is just not your DNA.
Right.
I mean, you when you sign books, you sign things that are quite personal. DP, I'm a huge fan of yours, Michael. That's not uncaring, Michael.
Now, speaking of not caring, I don't really care how you come across, but I will say that for me, when you got your slide deck up, all I'm seeing is a white screen. I'm not actually seeing your slides at the moment. Now, I'm not sure if that's something that other people. Oh, there we go. That's better.
Yeah.
So we're going to start by just kind of doing a kind of almost an audit around kind of how you might be coming across on the relatable states. So
Yeah.
do I come across as an uncaring person? I mean, do people actually know whether they come across as an uncaring person? Because, we've all got that kind of delusion about how we're seen in the world. How do people figure this out, whether I'm like, am I relatable or am I not?
Well, I mean, first of all, you're going to have, as a leader, you'll know when buy-in occurs. People going above and beyond the call of duty, people volunteering their time, people volunteering ideas, people sharing ideas or innovative ways in which to, operate. It's so relatively easy to see the uncaring leaders because the team isn't behind them, or they're off, in the cafeteria or the lunchroom, and they're talking smack about that particular individual because they see them as a jerk. I mean, the other one is, you've heard the Teflon theory, of course, Michael. How many people have you come across who are leaders who come to work in sort of a suit of armor, yet on the weekends they're a teddy bear?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you be someone different? Why can't you be that caring person like you are with your family? Imagine if you were Marcella and you went into the box of crayons and Marcella said, well, why do you treat me, that's Michael's wife, of course, why would you treat me different at home? And then she went to one of your functions at work with box of crayons and you were a totally different person.
So relatability has something to do with a degree of consistency and authenticity as well.
Absolutely. Who are you? I mean, and then, secondly, if you're authentic, I hope you're being connected with your people. So if you detach yourself from the team, again, kind of almost pretending you're someone else, that hierarchy plays into play here. You're better than others, and so there's no reason to actually have relationships with people on the team. People see right through that, Michael.
Yeah. And what's the final question we got here?
Have I invested time in getting to know others as actual human beings? So, for example, do you know, maybe the team members' kids' names? Do you know that someone just came back from a soccer tournament from the weekend and wondered how they did as a family? They just went on a holiday in Lucca, Tuscany, and they just loved biking. Did you ask questions about, the wall in Lucca and, how incredibly magnificent that was? These are human being type questions. We can have those types of relationships.
So I'm betting that almost everybody listening in here is thinking to themselves, yeah, fair enough. I get the importance of being relatable. But there's one thing to understand that in theory, there's another thing to actually do that in practice. So I know when I'm thinking about relatability, I'll share I'll share a couple of the thoughts I've got, the approaches I've got to try and increase my relatability. The first is just to challenge myself on how relatable I actually am. Because I do think we've got these cognitive biases that make us feel that we're smarter, nicer, more liked, funnier than we might actually be. And there's
Right.
good reasons for having these cognitive biases. It kind of gives us a secure sense of ourself. But one of the challenges you might sit with the people who are sitting here, which is like, if I was 10% less relatable than I think I am, what would I want to do differently? What would I want to change? And I tell you what, for me, Dan, a lot of this comes, you start by understanding where you stand at the moment. And certainly in North America, and I think globally, there's these conversations about power and privilege and status.
Yeah.
And the relatability piece, I think, has to start with an understanding of where you stand in that spectrum. Because what I'm going to suggest as a tactic comes in part, it's fueled by the fact that, look, I basically got dealt most of the privilege cards. Like I'm a straight, white, overeducated, devastatingly good looking,
Underscore.
white guy who has written books. I was a Rhodes Scholar, blah, blah, blah. I've got a law degree. I mean, there's all sorts of boxes that I tick, which means I'm just invested in status,
Yeah.
which is helpful for me. I mean, I win, I benefit from that, but
Yeah.
immediately makes me go, actually, that sets up some barriers between me and relatability, barriers I might even be blind to because I don't come from a less privileged position. I'm not a person of color. I'm not a woman. I'm not transgender. I'm not educated, all of that sort of stuff. But one of the things that I look to do is try to dismantle my status to be relatable. And of course, where you stand in this world and how much status you have depends on how you might go about or think about this. But I do a couple of things. The one is I show my scars a lot. I spend more time lingering on my failures than I do on my successes, in part because failures are just a bit more interesting. If all you do is list success, that doesn't actually make you relatable. It puts up a bit of a barrier. You heard in my introduction, which I wrote, I'm like sued by a law professor when I finished my law degree, banned from my high school graduation, knocked myself unconscious digging a hole when I was working as a laborer. I mean, my failures are legion, Dan. So there's a way of celebrating my failures and making that an important part of my story, because it shows a degree of self-awareness, which connects to relatability. But I think in some ways, Dan, this comes back to a degree of what is humility? What does
That's
being
exactly it.
humble mean?
Yeah.
And there's something I want to challenge, and then I'll stop monologuing, which is when I say be humble, a lot of people say, be subservient, be cap in hand, be kind of like, oh, I'm not good enough for that. I don't think that's what humility means. I think being humble means being grounded in who you are in both your strengths and your weaknesses. The root word for humility, for humble, is the same root word that in English is the word for humus, for ground. It means
Yeah.
having your feet on the ground as to who you are. Know what you're good at, know what you're not good at, and own both of those aspects of who you are. It makes you a richer, more rounded person. It makes you more available to help and to be helped. And I think that all helps contribute to being relatable.
You could be mistaken for Chris Martin writing lyrics for Coldplay right now, Michael. It's wonderful stuff. I agree, and I'll add on to that with a slight deviation. So the whole piece of humble pie, as I see it, is twofold. One is you need to know your empathy quotient. So to be relatable, to be thus humble, and thus to demonstrate humility, if you're not a raging empath, which sounds oxymoronic, of course, But if you're not doing what I call head, heart, and hands, so putting your head into the heads of other people, not literally, Michael, come on now. So just intellectualizing how people are thinking.
Yeah.
And why are they thinking differently? Because perhaps they're of a different gender, race,
Yeah.
ethnicity, geography, socioeconomic status, name it, right? There's about 50 other markers we could sort of think about. But secondly, when I say emoting what people are emoting, you're putting your heart into their heart. And so
Right.
you're feeling what they're feeling, or at least as best you can. So whether
Right.
they're going through a divorce, what does that feel like? Whether they've just had a child, what does that feel like? Whether they just lost their grandmom, what does that feel like?
Nice.
And they've lost their job, you just had to fire them, what does that feel like? And then what scientists or behaviorists call sympathetic empathy is the third type. That's what I metaphorically use as the hands. And that's when
Right.
you're trying to do something about it. So now, not only do you recognize their situation by thinking what they're thinking and feeling what they're feeling, now because of perhaps our privilege, for sure, we can do something about it. I'll give you a story of that. When I was kind of in, as you know, kind of book promo mode, I was doing a bunch of kind of clips, video clips, and sending them out on the various interwebs and so forth. And I sent one week before book launch, just a 60-second video. But I wore a Black Lives Matter shirt
Right.
on that video. And I must have got probably 6 or 7 emails from folks who said, hey, don't you think you'll lose potential customers by wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt?
Mm.
And then my response was, with all due respect, it has taken me longer for me to be relatable, if you will, and to do something about it with my hands than should have, given, my best mate as a Black man was the best man at our wedding, and I haven't really stood up for him or for Black Lives Matter. So that's, again, my answer to add on to your point is, number one, the empathy quotient. Number two, Michael, is when we're talking about humility and being humble, it's taking the power out of your role.
Mm.
So my example will be an American one, but it sort of sets the tone, I would argue. And it's with Speaker of the House Rayburn from the 60s and 70s. So for about 17 years, he was Speaker of the House of Representatives. For Europeans and those from Asia Pac, essentially that means in America that's third in command. Now I only know this because I read about it, I'm Canadian. So it goes President, Vice President, Speaker of the House of Representatives. Rayburn one day was notified early in the morning by an aide, still at his house, that one of the Washington reporters had tragically lost their daughter the night before in a car accident. And so Rayburn shows up that morning to the reporter's house, knocks on the door and says, look, I'm just here to make sure you're okay, pay my respects. And then Rayburn also then almost simultaneously asked the reporter and his wife, hey, have you had your morning coffee and your breakfast yet? And the reporter said, no, we've been grieving, And so Rayburn pushes through, goes to the back of the house, starts making breakfast. At which point, as you know, in the Washington circuit, every reporter knows what the calendars basically are, an agenda of politicians and so forth. So the reporter stops and has this epiphany and asks Rayburn, weren't you supposed to be at the White House having breakfast? And Rayburn immediately responds back and says, yes, I was. However, I phoned the president and told him that a friend was in need and that I wouldn't be there. So that's the two-part point that I wanted to make with you, and I agree. It's, for me, the empathy quotient, and then it's the, what am I doing to take power out of my role to relate to people?
Nice. Then let's move to the second point. I know times are ticking, and we don't want to make sure we get through these 5 points. So
True.
being
Good
relatable
point.
is the first of the 5 things we want to share. Number 2 is staying present. So when you say staying present, what are questions that are useful to ask that just kind of are almost an audit, as like, how good am I at this already?
Yeah, I mean, you've spoken about it when we did the intro. Essentially, you're asking people for their attention, their focus. Like, what are you going to do to stay present? So, the questions of controlling your time versus events controlling me. recognizing when you're in the virtual or physical presence of others, like your team members, are you there for them? Or are you distracted? Or do you enjoy the dopamine hit of the red tick marks on your social media feed, so you stare at those more? And then, of course, whether it's your family or your team, if you're a workaholic, that's not being present to yourself. You'll end up burned out, and ultimately it'll be a pretty horrible situation. I know you, Michael, speak of being present in all of your writing. So what are the tactics that you suggest when you're working with executives on how to stay present for themselves and the team?
Yeah, I love that. And for me, it's really interesting in the book that you've connected time and time management, which people have talked about and heard about. If you go into the getAbstract library, there's a bunch of books that they've summarized there for you around time management. But what I like about that and what you've done here is you pulled it to a bigger outcome, which is presence with yourself, presence with your work, presence with the people around you. So I've got a few things. But the tactic I am using most often at the moment, and I've tried all of them over the years, I'm going to give you two tactics. Here's the number one tactic. I take this from a friend of mine, a guy called Neil Pazarica, also Canadian, based here in Toronto. He's written a series of books on being awesome. His latest one is called How to Be Awesome. And he has a 3-question check-in at the start of the day. And I've been using these check-ins for the 9 months since his book came out, and I've really found them helpful. So let me give you everybody the 3 questions to check in. The first is this: what will I let go of? What will I let go of? I think this is really powerful, because one of the things that pulls us out of presence is anxiety and worry. And you know how you can have that kind of churning, open loop discomfort where you're like, I keep thinking about this thing and it keeps rattling around my head and it drives you nuts. One of the things that I found in just journaling, and I use an actual a book, but you can do this online or you can do it any way you want, is writing down what I'll let go of, actually names it, quantifies it, makes it concrete, and kind of takes it out of my backpack onto the table so I don't have to carry it around with me all the time. Some days when I'm checking in, I'm letting go of the same thing because it keeps showing up. But what I find is writing what will I let go is a releasing act. So that's really helpful. Second question that Neil shared with me and that I use and is very good for presence is, what am I grateful for? What am I grateful for? And there's just a ton of research around the power of gratitude. It just makes your life better by being grateful. So you can quickly go through all the kind of the obvious stuff around, like, I'm happy, I'm grateful for my family. But this morning when I was checking in, I was like, I'm grateful for the shine on my pen. It's a copper pen, and I love this pen. And I just polished it yesterday because it's copper, it gets dull, and it glows in the morning. I'm like, I'm really grateful for that little moment of beauty. And that short moment of gratitude sets me up for a happier day. And then the third question that Neil offers is, what will I focus on today? And I find that's extremely helpful, because one of the things that crushes us, helps us not be present, is the relentless to-do list. Because let's face it, we've all got to-dos that stretch to infinity, just like we have inboxes that stretch to infinity. It's impossible to get it all done. So, an earlier book I wrote called Do More Great Work, it's like, how do you do more great work that has more impact, work that has more meaning? And what will I focus on forces me to go, here's my focus, my great work, this is the thing that I'm working on today. And, when I checked in today with myself, what I will focus on today is to be really present and interesting and engaged with some friends of ours, Marcel and my wife and I are going to see for lunch and have kind of lunch coffee with. I'm like, I really want to be present with them. So I actually checked in to say, that's my focus today. How do I really show up and be a great companion and guest for these people? So that's a tactic I use. Dan, how about you? How would you encourage people to go, here's how you lift your game to be present?
Well, first of all, I want to pay homage to your bestseller, The Coaching Habit, because you spend a good amount of time on focus, Michael, and I think people should be aware, if they're not aware of your book. One of the sections you talk about, right, in which you find out how to stop spending so much time and effort solving the wrong problem.
Sure.
Well, that allows you to be proactive in what you're trying to ascertain, what you should be spending your time on. So a couple of
Absolutely.
the tactical thing I would suggest to actually get to that point that you suggest is to have focus blocks in your calendar.
Yeah.
So for example, despite the fact it's 7 o'clock in the morning in the Pacific time zone where I'm at, typically speaking, I don't take meetings until 8:30 a.m. Pacific, and I don't take meetings after 4 o'clock Pacific, and I don't take meetings from 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock Friday afternoons.
Yeah.
That's my time. That's think time. That's focus time. That's allowing me to make sure I'm not solving the wrong problem. That makes
Nice.
sure that I'm solving the real problem, not the first problem, as you also allude to. But the focus block, I think, is a key, real easy tactic. Own your calendar and win back your time in order to stay present.
So I'll tell you how I kind of build on Dan's tactic there. I use something called Calendly as a way
Yeah,
of managing my calendar because I know in theory how to do time blocks, but in practice I compromise that all the time. All the time. I'm just lousy at it. I'm like, I'm going to work from 8 to 10 on this thing, and then somebody goes, can I call you? And I'm like, sure, please. Save me from this work that I don't really want to do. So
right.
what's great about Calendly is you can actually kind of set your time block. So for instance, I'm asked regularly to be on podcasts.
Yeah,
Now what I do when somebody invites me to be a podcast, I send them a link to Calendly. And on this particular link, they can only book on Friday afternoons between 12 and 4 o'clock. Because I'm like, that's my podcasting time. I can only do 2 per week, and it's Fridays 12 to 4. And what I find is these structures, this technology stops me compromising my own good intentions because it's
yeah.
built into a structure, it's built into technology. Curiosity. Number three,
Well, this
and
is,
honestly, probably my favorite, or the one I know most about perhaps, is to
I
save
was
your
gonna,
three things because, Box of Crayons, the training company that I founded, its vision, its mission is to help organizations move from advice driven to curiosity led. So I spend a lot of time championing curiosity. In both of my books, The Coaching Habit and The Advice Trap, as Kristen said, these abstracts are available at getAbstract in the library. I talk about coaching as, can you stay curious a little bit longer? Can you rush to action and advice giving a little bit more slowly? So I'm really excited about this.
in the advice trap, I mean, in big bold letters, right? You write, your job is to keep being curious.
Right.
And that's as a leader, as a person, as a coach, as a parent, as a wife, as a sibling, as a father. I truly that when I obviously I got a wonderful advanced copy of the book, and that was one of the words that stuck out for me in the advice trap. And so I'm actually paying homage to you about your curiosity quotient. And for me, part of it revolves around the old adage, which I know you know all too well, but for others that might not have heard this before, here we go. What got you here won't get you there.
Right.
So your ability to remain curious is asking yourself the questions, kind of the ones we see on the screen, but others. Are
Mm.
you making the time to learn? Do you put in the time to listen? Are you encouraging others to develop on your team? Or do you just leave it to themselves?
Yeah.
And then that sort of notion of curiosity being an accrual to lifelong learning. If you don't subscribe to being a lifelong learner, Michael, I don't know how you can become, this lead care win or coaching habit type of leader, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me give you the tactic that I think is, I'm going to give you a mindset and a tactic around being
Yeah,
curious. Here's the mindset I would love people to take away. I want you in your organization, wherever you are, wherever you are in the hierarchy, however big or small your organization is, wherever you are in the world, I want you to shift your goal from being the person known as coming up with the answers to the person known for figuring out what the real challenge is. It
brilliant.
is
Yeah,
an elevation from being tactical to being strategic. Because quite frankly, your organization is full of people who think they know the answers, and it is bereft of people with the discipline to actually figure out what the real challenge is. And I'm going to give you a tactic. It's my two favorite questions, and it's a script. Here's how it goes. When somebody comes to you and goes, "Hey, Michael, how do I do this thing?" Here's what you go. You go, look, I'm excited that this is the challenge. I'm going to ask you some questions. Here's my first question. I'm going to say, hey, what's the real challenge here for you? This is one of the questions from the Coaching Habit book. What's the real challenge here for you? Write this down. If you're listening, write this down. What's the real challenge here for you? And they'll say something, and you'll nod your head, and you'll feel this deep desire to give them advice, because that's what happens. Your advice monster comes up out of the dark and goes, add some value, tell them some stuff. And you're like, no,
Yeah.
resist that. You're going to then ask your next question. You go, great, what else? What else is a real challenge here for you? They're going to be a bit surprised, but they're going to have something.
Yeah.
And then your advice monster is now tell them something. You got to. And you're like, no, not yet. Then you're going to go, what else? What else is a real challenge here for you? And now this person's a bit confused. They're like, I've never had a conversation like this before, but actually amazing stuff is beginning to unfold. And then you're going to lean in a little closer, look them in the eye, pause a moment just for effect, and say, so what's the real challenge here for you? And what you will have found is, in the case, in like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, maybe, the conversation will have shifted, changed, and you'll have landed on a challenge that's more specific, more real, more urgent, more personal, more important, and you will empower that other person. You'll stop wasting time solving the wrong problem, and you'll have them doing the work rather than you doing the work. Because, going back to our last one, staying present, part of the reason that you are overwhelmed at the moment is you're busy solving other people's problems for them. And curiosity is a balm to that hurt. So that's my approach to curiosity, Dan. How would you think about curiosity? What would you offer up as a tactic for folks?
I call it nurture forward. And so it pays homage to the pay it forward concept. Nurture forward is twofold. It's you continuously being open to something new and then teaching it to someone else. So you learn something because you're curious. Oh, wow. This is an example, right? I knew nothing about the game Catan during the pandemic. And so my kids taught me how to play Catan. And then through that learning, I went and taught Catan to friends of ours, and we had a Catan tournament. It's kind of a neat little board game. And that's kind of the point, is when you're curious about something and not saying no to the opportunity of learning something new, and then when you learn it, you're like, wait a second, I could nurture this forward. Because as we know, psychologists prove to us that when you teach something to someone else, it actually has a better chance of sticking with you.
Totally.
So it's kind of twofold. The nurture forward component, I would argue, is something to look forward to.
I love it. All right. So curiosity, we've got that's 3 down. Be relatable, stay present, remain curious. And just to remind people that there's a picture of like Dan's 9 lessons from the book. We're only getting to touch on 5 of them. The other 4 you're going to have to just go check out that getAbstract download. Dare to share. What do you even mean by this, Dan?
Well, it's I love rhyming. I mean, I want to be Public Enemy rapper, to be honest. I think I'm Chuck D sometimes. But in essence, in all seriousness, when as a leader of self and leader of others, if we're not asking some of these questions about what do I hold, competence, intelligence, knowledge, information, data, anything about a customer, about something that's occurred in the industry, if I'm not willingly saying, who could use this? And then secondly, Michael, if I'm not actually out there thinking, what do I need from others in order to grow myself, my objectives, etc., it's a problem. And when you live on sort of the island of misfits and outcasts, and it's just an island itself, and you're not either willing to get off the island to share or to get off the island and say, who else has information for me to do my job or to be a better person or leader? That's so important. And I know one of the other points here we've talked about many, many times is feedback. Sharing feedback both to someone and asking for it is such an important equation to the whole dare to share model. So I'm curious how you see it.
What I like about what you're proposing here, Dan, is the twist on the usual thing, which is like not just share, which is like going beyond some of the silos that you find in many organizations, but take responsibility to be shared with.
Exactly.
Don't wait for the feedback that you're looking for. Go find the feedback that you're looking for. Have the courage to initiate those conversations. Have the courage to build the relationships with people beyond the obvious that will actually open up the possibility for sharing. Now, I've got a tactic here that I want to share, Dan, which is it's a little more about sharing on a personal level. So in some ways, this comes back to be relatable and be present and also remain curious. So it's a kind of tool that helps with all of those, but it's connected to sharing as well. And it's called social contracting. A writer called Peter Block taught me about social contracting, and it's about how to build stronger relationships with people. Because here's the thing, as soon as you start working with somebody on your team or a colleague or a peer, it's all about the work. You just get into the, how do we get stuff done here? What's the problem? What's the project? What's the challenge? And it's very seductive. And of course, it feels urgent, shouting at you, this is already late. Why aren't you working on this? And social contracting is when you stop and you say, let's talk about how we're going to work together. It happens almost never. But what this does is it gives you the chance of building a more resilient relationship. Because I can promise you, when you start working with somebody, you start off strong. Hey, I like you, you like me. We have a shared goal. Let's go for it. And it goes off the rails. It always goes off the rails slightly. Sometimes it blows up, but often it's just a kind of, it's a bit dented, it's a bit broken, it's a bit disappointing. And social contracting is a really powerful way to kind of give you both permission to talk about the way you are working together on an ongoing basis. That's the real magic of this. So the questions I have in social contracting is like, when you've worked with somebody like me and it's gone really well, what happened? What did you do? What did they do? And I ask the question and I answer the question. This is the sharing bit. Like, let me tell you when I've worked with somebody like you and it's gone really well, what they did, what I did. I'm like, when you've worked with somebody like me and it hasn't gone well, what happened? What did you do? What did they do? And then I share my answer as well. Here's what I did. Here's what I did. I'm sharing my playbook. This is what makes me work. One of the questions that Peter Block suggests is, how do you feel about the amount of power I have in this relationship? That's really interesting, really provocative. It's like, here's how I feel about the power I have in this relationship. And it surfaces something that is often left unspoken. So social contracting, it's a pretty big topic, actually. I could do a whole webinar on it, but that's a taste of it. And it's about sharing how we work well together and also what we need to do when things go off the rails a little bit.
I love that, and Peter, of course. My simple tactic that I would share in the Dare to Share module and lesson is what I call up, down, and around. And so that's to your point earlier of you giving me a bit of a virtual kudo on taking ownership. So if you employ up, down, and around, the up part is you looking out to your team members, like literally those on your team, and saying, who needs this stuff that I've got?
Right.
The down part is you taking ownership on what do I need and going out and getting it, because you can't wait necessarily for people to deliver the goods. So you have to have a little gumption, Michael, and get yourself off of your inbox and your seat and go find the information and not be meek about it. And then the around, that's for you to look up outside of your unit, your team, maybe even outside of your organization, and saying, who in my network, if my network is my network, might also have information for me to gather or to deliver to help them out. So there's a bit of reciprocity hope there. So up, down, and around are sort of my tactics for daring to share.
Perfect. So let's go to number 5. 4 down, 1 to go. And I like command clarity.
It doesn't sound very caring, does it, Michael?
Exactly. That's why I wanted to do this one, because it's a bit provocative. It doesn't sound like this is a caring statement. And I think one of the most caring acts you can do is to drive clarity, to command clarity. So what are the questions that we've got here?
Well, some people know you and I were hopefully viewed as cuddly teddy bears that happen to be in the leadership space, right? I would hope. Our shirts, our hats, our humor, I would hope at times. But to put the word command in a book about caring and being a more caring leader was purposeful, somewhat obviously. And it's not about command and control. Obviously, those are two words that we both hate in a sentence. or in an edict. But what I'm getting at here is we need, as an individual, if we're going to be a caring leader, if we're not in charge of our own clarity of purpose, clarity of direction, clarity of vision, clarity of who's on the team and why, clarity of decision making, it all falls apart and you end up being a very uncaring leader because you look frazzled or you look discombobulated, and it just doesn't feel engaging like for a team member to be part of a leader's purview or organization whom looks scatterbrained, and it just, I've been there and I know others have. You've got to command your clarity. What say
Nice.
you, MBS?
Well, look, before I share my tactic, because I've got one key question that I think is essential to this, I'm going to say three things. First of all, we're going to spend the last 10 minutes or so of this conversation in Q&A, so you can see that the getAbstract folk are saying, give us your questions in the chat box, so let's see your questions there. We certainly want to answer as many as we can in the time we have. I know some people drop off when we go into Q&A, so before people drop off, Dan, where can people find you on the web?
Man, see, this is your empathy. You're such a kind human being. I really love you like a brother. The book, leadcarewin.com, is the best way in which to find this one.
And for me, if you want to find out more about my work, mbs.works is the hub, mbs.works, nice short URL. And that's where you find my books and some of the free stuff that I offer there as well. So for some of you who are curious about that, we'll welcome you on either of those websites. Here's my question for commanding clarity. I think fuzziness exists in our organizational life because of our willingness to keep saying yes to stuff. In the Coaching Habit book, again, accessible through the getAbstract download that you can get from the library there, I talk about the strategic question. And the strategic question is this: if you are going to say yes to this, what must you say no to? And I think way too many of us say yes without coming up with the no. And quite frankly, a yes that doesn't have a no giving it shape and purpose and force is weak and ambiguous and delusional. And I think it's right up there with the actually so much of the tactics that you provide here. This is why this is a leadership book, because for me, leadership is about transcending the day-to-day busyness and tactics, seeing the bigger picture, having the courage to make the difficult decisions and to say this way, this direction, here's how we make this journey. And even though it's like lead, care, win, this is how you bring people along on this journey, but leadership is so often about being willing to make the decision, to have the courage, and to command clarity. So for me, the tactic that I would share, Dan, is if you say yes to anything, you have to understand the opportunity cost of that yes, and therefore you have to be willing to articulate the no's that make it a real commitment, or else you end up breaking your promises, which only diminishes your capacity and your influence and your reputation and your ability to lead.
Oh, it's poetic, Michael. I'll take a different tactic as a tactic to employ, and something I call decisive duty. There's nothing more frustrating for a team member when a leader has all the data, has ample time in which to make a decision, and they fence it, or they suffer from what, obviously Dr. Ansop once called paralysis by analysis, right? And gosh, it's so disengaging. It's very unclear where you stand as a leader. You're certainly not commanding clarity. So if anything, I call it decisive duty. When you have the information and the data, make a decision. It may not be necessarily the best decision, and you can alter course and be flexible and malleable and maybe have to change it later on. But don't sit there for weeks on end when the team has done everything they can to get you to make that decision. Please don't sit on it. That's just
and honestly, the more senior you become, the messier and harder the decisions should be that you're wrestling with. They're the ones that people haven't been able to figure out. You should only be seeing the stuff that's hard. So there we go. There are our 5 principles that we shared with you, 5 of the 9 that are from Dan's book. But we've got 10 minutes, or at least 9.5 minutes for questions. So we're going to start seeing some of those coming through to us. Kirsten, Look at that. You got a beam of light coming through. It's like you're arriving with the
Which
apocalypse. That's fantastic.
the sun just came in through the window. As many
Perfect.
of you probably who work from home office start to understand the complications of being your own production manager in your home
It's a
office.
metaphor. You show up and sunshine appears. I mean, that's not a coincidence. That's got to be the way the world is working.
I
There you go.
try. No, and now we have a fabulous hat. No, thank you both so much. That was a really, really incredible presentation and really enjoyed all of the 5 points.
Good.
But we want to dive into some questions because we've gotten some great ones from the audience. So
Thank
I'll
you,
start
audience.
off with, we'll start off with one for Dan, and that is empathy in the workplace just a new generation thing? We had several questions about this topic and the thought that for some traditional leaders, they might not feel it's necessary or appropriate in the workplace.
Well, Dan, can I take a first crack at this?
Yeah, go for it,
Well,
brother.
I've got a really strong opinion about this because what people are pointing to is spot on, which is like, come on, is empathy just another HR word? Touchy-feely BS leadership where I have to be nice to people and all of that stuff. And I'm like, you know what? Here's why empathy is important. As a leader, you make better decisions when you have a better grasp of reality. If you are just in your own head, you have a distorted view of reality. And I think there are 3 attributes to great leadership that help you get reality better. Better knowledge of yourself. That's actually humility that we talked about before. What are my real strengths? What are my real weaknesses? Better understanding of the other person, what's really going on for them. That could be somebody on your team. It could be your boss. It could be a peer. It could be a customer. It could be a client. And then what I would call mindfulness, which is just a better grounding of what actually is happening out there. So self, other, and then the big picture. If you get better at all of those 3 things, you have a better grasp of reality, which makes you a smarter, more effective leader.
Well, that's a mic drop or a Michael Bungay Stanier drop. You know, bing, that was well done, friend. To answer the question, I think differently about history and is it important now and has it always been? You know, I look at stories like the Christmas truce of 1914, where the Germans and the Allies in no man's land were in their trenches singing Christmas carols in their native tongue, and they kind of were thinking about one another, even though they were at war. And they got up out of the trenches and they started playing football in no man's land. They exchanged rations. They smoked cigarettes together. You know, that's empathy. That's getting up and looking out and saying, huh, what's up over there? Interesting. Maybe we could come together. And to Michael's 3 points, it kind of embodies the spirit. If we were doing that 100 years ago at war, might we as leaders in our organizations, when arguably we're not at war with one another, actually empathize a little more with how people are thinking, feeling, and then we ultimately get to do something about it. So
Beautiful.
I think it's critical, mission critical type of behavior for today's society. And Kirsten, we're in a pandemic. Is there any natural leadership behavior more so that we need than empathy? Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points. Another one, what is the risk for employees starting to see you as a friend rather than as a leader?
Well, I mean, certainly there could be risk, depends how friendly you get. So aside from being an HR violation itself, you know, when I've led teams of 30 to 150 people, I considered and always used the words such as, you know, I feel like this is my second family. And the reason I use that is because I wanted and always embody and try to embody the spirit of what is family. Family has ups and downs. Family is honest, open, and truthful, we hope. Family goes through dire straits, but they also end up potentially looking at things and saying, hey, let's go on this vacation. Let's go build this home. Let's help in the community. So for me, you know, as a leader of teams, it's okay to be a friend or to treat it like a nurturing type of family, because again, there's still parents in the house that have to be somewhat disciplinary at times with the children, if you will. So there's nothing wrong with that in my mind, to be both loving and stern as required, and making decisions, of course, as well. Michael?
Yeah, I think there is a risk of being vulnerable, of caring. You will get your heart broken. That's part of the deal. You will get let down, you will get betrayed, you will be disappointed, and you will be exhilarated, and you will be amazed, and you will be fulfilled and nurtured in a way that you won't otherwise. So, a friend of mine says every choice you make has prizes and punishments. So if you choose to care, if you choose to bring empathy to your workplace, there's prizes and punishments. If you choose not to care, if you choose to kind of be dispassionate, to kind of create a barrier, to not build relationship, there are prizes and punishments. You get to weigh those prizes and punishments. What Dan's calling forth is understand the choice you're making. And I think he makes a compelling case that the prizes outweigh the punishments when you build relationships. You don't have to be friends with them. There are people I work with who I'm not really friends with, but I am a good colleague to.
Yeah.
I have a social contract with. I understand how we're working together.
That's so great. We just have a few more minutes, so I want to end with a question about trends for 2021. And that is, what are your predictions for next year and beyond, especially given so much uncertainty with the pandemic, in terms of both leadership skills and learning and development priorities?
I think elasticated trousers are going to become very big.
All right, we'll put you down on the record for that one, Michael. We'll see what happens. We'll check the magazines next year.
I don't know about you, Dan. I have no idea what trends for 2021 are. This year has been so confusing and so topsy-turvy that I think we'd all be making stuff up. But it's been a year that's disrupted the usual way of working. Like hierarchy's been disrupted. Standard expectations of I need to come into work have been disrupted. Expectations of what we need to do as business as usual to survive as an organization have been disrupted. So I do think there's a way that what it means to work has been taken back to the nubs, to kind of use a building metaphor. And we're all going, this is scary and exhilarating to kind of go, can we rethink how we work now? Dan?
And I'll segue off of that, and that's exactly the point. How we work, where we work is going to be big questions to answer into 2021. When, the March sort of pandemic hit, we were, I would argue, frightened for a good portion of the rest of 2020 until about nowish, September, October, where it became sort of I guess we can do this. So, but what we need to be thinking about 2021, of course, is now, are we resetting for good what it means to work, where we work? And that means, the pendulum obviously switched to everyone at home for the most part. Are we going back to everyone in the office, or are we going to meet in the middle somewhere where there's a more hybrid model, allowing leaders and teams to work in different ways that we never imagined before because we got so used to one way? So although the tragedy of the pandemic is right in front of us, it's a huge shadow. When leaders step outside of that shadow and into the light, I think they'll see a new way of working.
Mm. So much wisdom. Thank you both so much. I wish we had some more time, but unfortunately we are going to have to wrap up here. But do not fret for all of you who attended. We do have this webinar recorded, and if you registered with us, you will be receiving a copy of this that you can watch again, take more notes, and share internally as well. So Dan and Michael, thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom.
Gerson, thank you.
It's awesome.
Yeah,
yes,
well, hold on. If you guys get this, also go visit Michael's TED Talk. This is so funny and amazing. So go visit the Advice Trap TED Talk.
Thanks, man.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to end by saying, please check out both Dan and Michael's books. Get a little snippet and abstract of these incredible concepts in the Get Abstract library. And then please go out and buy the book and read the whole thing. There's so much goodness here. And obviously, if you've seen, these are two men with extremely generous hearts. They just want to share that with you and with your organizations. So wishing you all a very wonderful rest of your day, wherever you are joining us from in the world. Dan and Michael, thank you so much.
Kirsten,
Everybody,
it's our pleasure.
thanks for having us along. Thank you, getAbstract.
Hat tip to
Thank
you.
all of you for watching. We'll see you at our next webinar very soon. Have a great day.
Ciao.